The champagne glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the marble floor. For a second, the entire room fell silent until the laughter erupted. It wasn't strangers laughing. It was my daughter, my own flesh and blood. "Mom," she said, loud enough for every guest to hear, "you can't stay with us anymore. You're just an extra mouth to feed. We have our own life now." The room tilted. My chest tightened. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to stay upright. Around me, the whispers spread like fire. Some guests shook their heads with pity, others with judgment. Her husband, my son-in-law, stepped forward with that smug grin he always wore. "You should understand, Mrs. Turner. You've had your time. It's our turn now. We need space for our future." Future. I almost laughed through the ache. Their future was built on the sacrifices I made. The nights I worked double shifts, the money I saved to pay for her college, the house I mortgaged so she could start fresh. And now, in front of these polished strangers, she stripped me of dignity like peeling off old wallpaper. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but the words tangled in my throat. I was frozen, exposed under the chandelier light. My daughter's eyes held no warmth, only irritation, like I was a burden she had carried for too long. Behind her, I noticed something odd. A tall man in a gray suit lingered in the corner, watching me. He didn't laugh, he didn't whisper, his eyes locked on mine, steady, almost knowing. When I blinked, he turned and slipped away before I could make sense of it. And just like that, the whispers swallowed me again. I bent down to pick up the broken glass, but my daughter's voice cut through the air. "Don't. The staff will handle it. You should just leave." Leave. I straightened slowly, my hands trembling, my heart cracking in places I didn't know existed. Around me, no one moved to help. Not one hand reached out. I was invisible, except for their judgment. And in that moment, I realized my daughter had just erased me from her world. I walked out of the banquet hall, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears like chains dragging across the floor. Each step was heavier than the last. Outside, the night air stung my face. I gripped the railing, forcing myself to breathe. The shame burned hotter than any flame. I had been discarded, labeled useless, in front of people who would remember this humiliation far longer than I could forget it. But as I stood there trembling, something else flickered inside me. Not anger, yet. Not revenge, just the faint pulse of survival. I reached into my bag, pulling out the worn envelope I always carried. Inside were old documents, savings records, property titles my late husband and I had tucked away years ago. I had forgotten most of them existed. Until now. As I flipped through the papers with shaking hands, one name leapt out at me. The very same real estate company that owned the building where my daughter lived. My husband had done business with them decades ago. I never thought much of it, until this moment. Suddenly, the humiliation didn't feel final. It felt like the first crack in a wall that was about to collapse. I lifted my head. Through the banquet hall windows, I could see my daughter clinking glasses, smiling as if she had won something. But she didn't know what I held in my hands. She didn't know that the same mouth she called extra still had teeth. And as I walked away into the night, my heart whispered a promise. They think I'm gone, but this is only the beginning. I should probably tell you who I am, before the world twisted into this cruel version of itself. My name is Margaret Turner. Most people just called me Maggie. I'm 58 years old, widowed for almost a decade now. My husband James died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving me with more debts than comfort, and a daughter who was only 17 at the time. Back then, survival meant sacrifice. I worked as a nurse's aide during the day and cleaned offices at night. My hands cracked from chemicals, my back ached from lifting patients twice my size, but I never let my daughter see how tired I was. She was my reason for everything. Her dreams became mine. Her comfort came before mine. I sold the car to pay her tuition. I mortgaged the house to cover her college dorm. I skipped meals so she could buy books. I thought, no, I believed, with every fiber of my being, that if she could climb higher, all my pain would be worth it. And in some ways it was. She graduated with honors, married well, and moved into a modern apartment downtown. I told myself her success was mine too. I told myself I had fulfilled my purpose. But as the years passed, she stopped calling as often. Visits became rare. She said she was busy. But when I saw her at family gatherings, she always seemed distant, like I was a relic from a past she wanted to forget. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself love required patience. I told myself that one day she would remember the nights I stayed up with her fever, the mornings I walked miles to save bus money, the way I never let her see me cry when James died. But patience has its limits. 2 months ago, when my landlord sold the small unit I'd been renting, I had nowhere else to go. Out of options, I swallowed my pride and asked my daughter if I could stay with her, just until I get back on my feet. She smiled then, even hugged me. "Of course, Mom, you'll always have a place with me." I believed her. And now, after tonight's humiliation, I finally understood. To her, I wasn't a mother anymore. I was dead weight. Yet despite the pain, there is another truth I cannot ignore. I am not as helpless as they think. James left me more than just debt. He left me knowledge, connections he made in his construction days, papers tucked away in old boxes, and lessons on how the real world works. At the time, I ignored most of it. I was too busy holding us together. But now, those forgotten scraps might be the only lifeline I have left. I know I look like a weak, discarded woman. That's the version of me they want to see. But inside, a storm has started, and storms have a way of reshaping everything in their path. The next morning, I woke up on a friend's worn-out couch, my head pounding from the night before. I had no home of my own now, no safe corner to crawl into. Just my friend Linda's tiny apartment, filled with the smell of burnt coffee and the faint sound of traffic outside her window. Linda was kind, but I couldn't stay here forever. She was already struggling to make rent herself. So I forced myself to step outside, into the city that had once felt like mine, but now seemed like hostile territory. The streets were loud, alive with honking horns and rushing footsteps. Billboards flashed luxury brands I could never afford, while I clutched my second-hand coat tighter around me. I ended up in front of the Regent, the sleek, glass-covered apartment complex where my daughter lived. I don't know why I went there. Habit, maybe, or a desperate need to see if it was real, if she truly meant what she said. The Regent was everything I wasn't anymore. Polished, modern, untouchable. The lobby smelled like fresh flowers and expensive polish, the kind of place that whispered, "You don't belong here." But I did walk in. At the reception desk, a young man in a sharp suit gave me a stiff smile. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I wanted to ask if I could still visit my daughter, if she had left instructions to keep me out. But before I could speak, I heard laughter, familiar laughter. She was there. My daughter, walking through the lobby with her husband. Her hair was perfect, her clothes designer, her smile radiant. They looked like the picture-perfect couple in an ad. And then her eyes landed on me. For the briefest second, I thought I saw guilt flicker there. But then her face hardened. She slipped her arm tighter around her husband's, like I was a stranger she didn't want to acknowledge. They walked past me without a word, not even a glance back. I froze, my chest aching, my throat dry. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I couldn't make a sound. Instead, I sank into one of the velvet lobby chairs, my hands gripping the envelope in my bag. That envelope, the one with James's old documents, suddenly felt heavier. I pulled it out and opened it again, right there under the chandelier light. Property titles, construction permits, old partnership agreements, pages with faded ink, and James's messy handwriting. And then I saw it, a signature. The name of the man who currently owned the Regent. It was familiar, too familiar. Because years ago James had told me about him, a ruthless developer who cheated contractors, underpaid workers, and buried people in legal traps. James had hated him. But he had also warned me, if you ever deal with him, be careful, he plays dirty. Now, here it was, the same name tied to this building, the building where my daughter lived, the building I had just been humiliated in. And suddenly, the pieces began to shift in my mind. This building wasn't just my daughter's home. It was the stage. The stage where everything had already started, and where it might all end. When people talk about villains, they usually think of strangers, someone far removed from their own blood. But mine wore my daughter's face, and standing right beside her was the man who sharpened her cruelty. My son-in-law, Daniel Pierce. Daniel had always rubbed me the wrong way. The first time he shook my hand, his grip was too tight, his smile too polished. He was the kind of man who looked at people the way a butcher looked at cuts of meat, assessing, calculating, deciding what they were worth. My daughter, Emily, had fallen for him in college. He was ambitious, charming, the type who knew how to light up a room. And she was young, eager to be swept away. I warned her, gently at first, then desperately, but she wouldn't listen. She said he made her feel safe. She said he saw her dreams. What I didn't realize was that once he married her, he'd make her see me as the enemy. The proof came only days after the banquet. I tried to call Emily, just once. She didn't answer. Hours later, I received a message, not from her, but from Daniel. It wasn't even a phone call, just a text. Margaret, stop calling. Emily needs space. You can't stay in our home, and you need to respect that. You raised her, sure, but she's mine now. Don't embarrass yourself. Mine now. The words cut deeper than the banquet humiliation. Emily wasn't his possession. She was my child. But somewhere along the way, Daniel had convinced her otherwise. The next day I went back to the Regent, hoping, foolishly, that I might at least speak to Emily in person. Instead, I found Daniel in the lobby, speaking with the property manager. He wore an expensive suit, gesturing with confidence like the whole building belonged to him. I froze near the entrance, watching. The property manager laughed at something he said, then handed him a folder. Daniel glanced inside and smirked before tucking it under his arm. When he spotted me, his smile turned sharper. He walked straight over, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. You don't belong here, Margaret, he whispered. Emily's too soft to say it, but I'm not. You're finished. I'll make sure of it. I wanted to shout, to slap the arrogance off his face, but before I could react, he added something that turned my blood cold. You think Emily remembers what you did? How you begged for money after James died? How pathetic you looked? Don't fool yourself. She resents you for it. You're not a mother in her eyes anymore. You're just baggage. He walked away before I could breathe again. I stumbled out of the building, my hands shaking. His words pierced deeper than knives, because, in some twisted way, part of me feared he was right. Had my sacrifices only made Emily see me as weak? Had my love become invisible? But then I remembered the man in the gray suit at the banquet. His knowing eyes, the way he vanished as soon as I noticed him. I hadn't seen him again, but the image burned in my mind. And when I thought about James's old papers, the signature of the building's owner, and Daniel's smug behavior in that lobby, a suspicion began to grow. What if Daniel's cruelty wasn't just personal? What if he had his own ties to this building, ties that explained his confidence, his contempt, his certainty that I couldn't fight back? My daughter may have chosen her side. But Daniel was pulling the strings. And now I knew, to get my daughter back, to get my dignity back, I would have to cut those strings one by one. The humiliation at the banquet was sharp, but what happened next was worse, because this time it was deliberate, orchestrated, and meant to erase me completely. It was a Sunday morning when I received a call from Linda, my only friend who still stood by me. Maggie, she said, her voice tense, you'd better come down here. It's about Emily and Daniel. I rushed to the corner cafe, still wearing the same worn coat. The place was crowded with neighbors, locals, and faces I had known for years. They were all staring at a screen mounted on the wall. The morning news played, but it wasn't politics or sports this time. It was my daughter. Emily and Daniel sat side by side at a press conference, smiling like the golden couple they pretended to be. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, microphones hovered. Daniel spoke first. We're proud to announce that Emily and I have partnered with the Regent Group to launch a new housing initiative for young professionals. We believe in creating communities where people can thrive. Applause filled the room on screen. But then a reporter asked something that made my stomach clench. What about your mother, Mr. Pierce? We heard rumors she was living with you recently. Emily shifted uncomfortably, but Daniel tightened his grip on her hand. His smile never faltered. My mother-in-law, he said smoothly, she's resting in a senior facility now. It's what's best for her. She needs proper care, and we simply couldn't provide that while focusing on our careers. Laughter. Agreement. Sympathetic nods. I froze in my seat, my breath caught in my throat. He lied. He lied in front of the entire city. He had painted me as a frail, useless old woman who couldn't even care for herself, shoving me into an imaginary nursing home. Emily sat silently beside him. She didn't correct him. She didn't defend me. She smiled. The cafe was silent for a moment before the whispers started. People turned to look at me, their eyes wide with pity, some with judgment. A few even muttered, "Poor thing, at least she's being taken care of." My cheeks burned, my hands shook. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that I was sitting right here, alive, capable, still fighting, but the words wouldn't come. My voice had been stolen by their lies. I stumbled out of the cafe, the whispers following me like shadows. On the sidewalk, I collapsed onto a bench, tears stinging my eyes. That was their plan. To bury me in shame, not just privately but publicly. To erase my existence and rewrite it into something pitiful, something that fit their story. But as I wiped my face, I noticed something across the street. A black car parked just far enough to blend in, but I saw him, the man in the gray suit, the same one from the banquet. He sat in the back seat, window half lowered, watching me again. This time, he didn't look away. He raised a hand slightly, like a signal. Then the car pulled into traffic and vanished. I sat frozen, my heart pounding. Who was he? Why was he watching me? And why, in the middle of my deepest humiliation, did it feel like he was waiting for me to rise? The days after the press conference blurred together like rain on dirty glass. I stopped going outside. I couldn't bear the stares, the whispers. My phone barely rang, except for Linda checking in. But even with her kindness, shame clung to me like a second skin. I barely ate. Half-empty soup cans collected on Linda's counter. My reflection in the mirror grew thinner, my cheeks hollow. My hands, once steady enough to lift patients and scrub hospital floors, now trembled when I tried to hold a cup of tea. At night, I lay awake on that worn couch, staring at the ceiling. The words echoed in my mind. She's just an extra mouth. She's mine now. She's in a senior facility. I told myself I didn't care. But the truth? I did. It hurt worse than anything my body had ever endured. I had lost my husband. I had lost my home. And now I had lost my daughter, my only child, the reason I had endured everything. Some nights I pressed the old envelope of James's documents against my chest, as though holding on to him, to the memory of someone who once saw me as more than disposable. But even that felt like sand slipping through my fingers. One evening, Linda tried to coax me out. "You can't let them do this to you, Maggie," she pleaded. "You've got to fight back." I shook my head. Fight with what? My health? My age? A box of papers no one cares about? Her eyes filled with tears. "You're stronger than you think, I know you are." But I didn't believe her. Not then. A week later, everything broke. I ventured out to the market, forcing myself to buy groceries with the last of my savings. But halfway down the street, I overheard two women talking near a bus stop. "Such a shame," one of them said. "Emily Pierce is doing so well. Imagine having a mother like that, leeching off her." The other woman sighed. "At least they put her away somewhere safe. Poor Emily having to deal with that embarrassment." My knees buckled. I dropped the grocery bag. Apples rolled across the sidewalk. A bottle shattered at my feet. I wanted to shout that they were wrong, that I wasn't in a facility, that I wasn't some helpless parasite. But no words came, just silence. Just shame. By the time I stumbled back to Linda's, I was shaking so hard I couldn't hold the key. She opened the door, took one look at me, and pulled me into her arms. That night, I broke. I wept until my chest hurt, until there was nothing left inside me but emptiness. And in that emptiness, something shifted. Because when you've been stripped of everything, your dignity, your family, your place in the world, there's only two paths left. You surrender, or you rise. I wasn't ready to rise yet, but I felt it. The faintest spark in the ashes. And then, as if fate itself had been listening, I found something new tucked inside James's envelope, something I hadn't noticed before. A faded photograph. James standing in front of a half-finished building, shaking hands with a man I instantly recognized. The man in the gray suit. The photograph shook something awake in me. James, my late husband, stood smiling in front of an unfinished building, his arm extended in a firm handshake. Beside him was the same man I'd seen at the banquet, at the cafe, and outside the market, the man in the gray suit. I traced his face with my finger. The photo was decades old, but there was no mistaking it. The same sharp jawline, the same piercing eyes. He hadn't aged much, or maybe my grief had erased the details before. On the back of the photo, James had scribbled in his messy handwriting, "Partnership sealed. Trust him, but only halfway." I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. Who was he? Why was he haunting my life now? The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, Linda convinced me to go for a walk. "Fresh air will do you good," she said, slipping her arm through mine. I didn't want to, but she dragged me out anyway. We ended up at the small park near downtown, with children laughing on the swings, dogs chasing after frisbees. For the first time in weeks, I almost felt human again. And then he appeared. The man in the gray suit. He approached with calm, deliberate steps, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Linda tensed, ready to intervene, but I raised a hand. Somehow, I knew he wasn't here to hurt me. "Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice smooth, steady, "we need to talk." I swallowed hard. "You know me?" "I knew your husband," he replied. "James and I worked together years ago. He trusted me to look out for you, if things ever went wrong." My knees almost gave out. "Look out for me? Why? Why now?" He glanced around, lowering his voice. "Because what's happening to you isn't an accident. Daniel Pierce is more than just a cruel son-in-law. He's tied to the Regent Group, the company that owns your daughter's building, and he's been positioning himself to take control. But to do that, he needed to cut you out of the picture." My chest tightened. "You mean all of this? The lies, the humiliation?" He nodded, calculated. "Every move. He wants to erase you, so no one questions his authority when he and Emily become the faces of Regent's new projects." I staggered back, the world tilting. My daughter's betrayal was bad enough, but to know it had been fed, orchestrated, manipulated by Daniel, it made me sick. Linda grabbed my arm. "Who are you, really?" she demanded. He reached into his pocket and handed me a business card. "Thomas Hale, senior partner, Hale & Knox Real Estate Law. I promised James I'd step in if it came to this," he said quietly. He feared Daniel even then. He suspected the Pierce family of dirty dealings long before Emily married into them. But James never lived long enough to prove it. I stared at the card, my hands trembling. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. "Not what I want," Thomas said, meeting my eyes. "What do you want? Because if you're ready to fight back, you have more power than you realize." That night, I sat awake with the photo, the card, and the envelope spread across Linda's kitchen table. My heart still ached, my body still felt weak, but for the first time in weeks, my despair shifted into something else. Not yet anger, not yet revenge, but resolve. Daniel thought he had buried me. Emily thought I was gone. But I was still here. And maybe, just maybe, James had left me more than debts. Maybe he had left me the tools to burn everything Daniel had built, brick by brick. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at Linda's kitchen table, the yellow bulb humming overhead, papers scattered like broken pieces of a puzzle. Thomas's words echoed in my head. "If you're ready to fight back, you have more power than you realize." But what power could I possibly have? I was broke. I was tired. I was nobody. Still, I sifted through the documents again, forcing myself to study every faded page. And then, I found it. A contract. Buried between old tax receipts and construction notes. James's name was right there, bold in his messy signature. And next to it, the name of the Regent Group. But this wasn't just any contract. This was a partnership agreement. One that outlined James's role in the very construction of the Regent, the glass-covered building where Emily now lived. And the kicker? A clause at the bottom, almost hidden in fine print. In the event of James Turner's passing, ownership rights of invested shares shall transfer to surviving spouse, Margaret Turner. My heart stopped. Ownership rights, not debts, not liabilities. Shares. I didn't just have scraps of paper. I had a legal claim to the very building Daniel thought he controlled. The next morning I met Thomas at a quiet diner on the edge of town. He was already there, sipping black coffee, a thick folder by his side. I slid the contract across the table. His eyes widened slightly, then he smiled, grim but satisfied. "Do you know what this means, Mrs. Turner?" I shook my head, my hands trembling. "It means you're not powerless," he said. "You're a shareholder in Regent. Legally, you own part of that building. If this contract holds up in court, and I believe it will, you could challenge Daniel directly. In fact, you could even seize controlling interest depending on how much he's leveraged already." I leaned back, dizzy. "Seize? Control?" Thomas nodded. "Daniel's been making reckless deals, spreading himself thin. If we time this right, we don't just stop him. We can turn the tables completely." I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to breathe. "Why didn't James ever tell me?" Thomas' eyes softened. "He didn't want to burden you. He thought he had more time to explain. but he made sure you'd have a weapon if the worst happened. He trusted you'd know when to use it. My throat tightened. Tears threatened, but I swallowed them down. James had believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Later that evening, Linda and I walked through the neighborhood, the autumn wind tugging at our coats. "You're shaking," she said gently. "I'm scared," I admitted. "What if I'm too late? What if Emily's already gone too far into Daniel's world?" Linda squeezed my arm. "Then you pull her out. You show her who you really are. You show him he picked the wrong woman to crush." Her words lit something in me. For weeks I had been drowning in shame, but now I had proof. I had leverage, and Daniel Pierce had no idea. As I lay in bed that night, one thought pulsed through me, steady as a heartbeat. They called me an extra mouth, a burden, a ghost. But soon, they would see me for what I truly was, the owner of their precious empire. The first thing I did was shed the old coat. It sounds small, almost trivial, but that coat had become a symbol of everything I had been reduced to, worn, tired, invisible. When I dropped it into the donation bin, I felt lighter, as if I had peeled off a layer of shame. With Thomas's help, I withdrew a small portion of the dormant funds tied to James's contract. Not much compared to what I now owned, but enough. Enough to buy a decent wardrobe. Enough to restore the version of myself I hadn't seen in years. At the boutique mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. My hair was styled neatly, my clothes sharp, fitted, professional. I looked like someone who belonged in boardrooms, not on a borrowed couch. But the real change wasn't on the outside. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, my spine straightened, my voice steadied, my eyes held fire. I was no longer the woman who picked up broken glass at her own humiliation. Thomas arranged our first official meeting at Regent's headquarters. I walked into the marble lobby with my chin high, my heels clicking against the floor. People glanced up from their desks, their conversations faltering. I could feel their confusion. I wasn't the ghost of the banquet anymore. I wasn't the pitiful woman from the cafe rumors. I was something else entirely. Daniel was there. Of course, in his tailored suit, surrounded by junior executives. His smirk faltered the moment he saw me. "Margaret," he said, half laughing, half snapping. "What are you doing here?" I handed him a copy of the contract. "Exercising my rights." His face drained of color as he scanned the papers. His eyes darted to Thomas, who stood calm at my side. "This is impossible," Daniel muttered. This can't be valid." "Oh, it's valid," Thomas said smoothly. "Which means Mrs. That Turner is not only a shareholder, but also entitled to participate in Regent's upcoming decisions, including rent adjustments." Daniel's jaw tightened. He tried to recover, forcing a laugh for the crowd gathering around us. "This is absurd. Emily won't stand for this. She knows where her loyalty lies." I looked him dead in the eye. "Then she can watch what happens when loyalty is built on lies." For the first time, Daniel didn't have a comeback. That night, as I sat with Linda, she studied me carefully. "You're glowing," she said softly. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Maybe I am. Maybe this is who I was always meant to be. But beneath the laughter, my mind sharpened with focus. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about reclaiming everything they had stolen from me, my dignity, my name, my power. The woman they tried to erase was gone. The woman who was coming back would be unstoppable. The boardroom was filled with polished tables, leather chairs, and faces that had underestimated me for far too long. Daniel stood at the head of the table, flashing his salesman's smile, preparing to announce his vision for Regent's future. Emily sat beside him, looking radiant, though her eyes darted nervously when she saw me walk in with Thomas. Gasps rippled through the room. The whispers started again, this time not in pity, but in shock. Daniel's face tightened. "You don't belong here, Margaret." I placed my folder on the table, sliding copies of the contract to each board member. "On the contrary, Daniel, I belong here more than you ever did." Thomas rose beside me. "Mrs. Turner holds a legitimate ownership stake in Regent. With your reckless expansions, Mr. Pierce, you've leveraged the company so heavily that her shares, combined with proxies we've secured, give her controlling interest." The room exploded in murmurs. Daniel's mask cracked. This is outrageous. She doesn't know the first thing about running a business." I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut steel. I know about sacrifice. I know about building something with my own two hands, and I know the difference between leadership and leeching. That's more than you can say. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Mom, what is this? I looked at her, my heart heavy but firm. This is the truth, Emily. Your husband has been using you, using Regent, and destroying anyone who stood in his way, including me. I let him turn you against me once. Never again. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. You're nothing but a washed-up old woman. You'll regret this. I straightened, every scar of the past months burning into strength. No, Daniel. The only one who will regret this is you. The next week, headlines splashed across every paper. Daniel Pierce under investigation for fraud. Regent Group shifts leadership. Widow of founding partner takes control. With Thomas's legal team, we uncovered everything. Daniel's falsified expense reports, shady kickbacks, and offshore accounts. The evidence piled high, undeniable. Within days, the authorities moved in. Daniel was arrested, his empire collapsing under the weight of his lies. And Emily? She came to me, tears in her eyes, the mask finally gone. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I let him twist everything. I forgot who you were. I forgot what you gave up for me. I took her hand, my heart aching but open. I don't need perfection, Emily. I just need honesty. If you're ready to rebuild, so am I. She nodded, clinging to me like the little girl I used to carry through stormy nights. Months later, I stood in the lobby of the Regent. Not as a guest, not as a discarded mother, but as its owner. Tenants greeted me with respect. Staff nodded warmly. And when rent adjustments came, they weren't cruel or greedy. They were fair, designed to help those who worked hard, not exploit them. The building that once symbolized my humiliation had become the stage for my redemption. I had been cast out, erased, and shamed, but I rose, stronger, smarter, unbreakable. And as I looked at Emily standing beside me, learning, growing, rediscovering the bond we'd almost lost, I felt peace. They thought I was just an extra mouth. But in the end, I was the one who fed them justice. They say betrayal is the wound that never heals. But I learned something different. Betrayal may scar you, but scars can become armor. There are nights I still lie awake, remembering the banquet, the cafe, the cruel words that branded me as useless. The pain doesn't vanish, it lingers. But now, it doesn't crush me. It reminds me of who I was and who I chose to become. Emily visits often. She brings flowers, sometimes dinner, sometimes just her presence. We don't speak about Daniel much. He belongs to the past now. Our conversations are softer, rawer. She tells me about her regrets, and I tell her about mine. For the first time in years, we are not mother and daughter caught in roles of obligation. We are simply two women, learning to love each other again. As for me, I've discovered something I never expected. A second life. I attend board meetings. I walk into rooms where no one thought I belonged, and I speak with a voice I once thought I had lost. Tenants greet me with gratitude, employees respect me, and for the first time I see my reflection not as a ghost, but as a woman who endured and rose. Sometimes when the city is quiet and the lights of the Regent glow against the night sky, I whisper to James, "We did it. You didn't leave me with debts, you left me with strength." And I know somehow he hears me. Because the truth is, I wasn't just an extra mouth. I was and always will be the backbone of everything they tried to take away. And now? Now I live not in shame but in dignity.